When we travel, that is, those of us privileged enough to travel, we usually pack two types of things. In Japanese, they're referred to as mono and koto. Mono is used for physical, tangible things like clothes and deodorant and toothpaste, while koto is used for intangible things like thoughts and feelings and ideas. Unpacking mono is a pretty straightforward process. You open your suitcase and you remove the items inside and you sort them out. You put your shirts there, pants there, toiletries over there, move on to the next bag and repeat as necessary. While unpacking koto is a more complicated, more involved process. And the person who enters into this process may be very different from the person who emerges from this process. Now, some people believe that human beings are incapable of change. And for the most part, I agree. If a person never has the chance to question and examine their core beliefs about the world, and more importantly, about themselves, chances are they won't change. But living in a fundamentally foreign environment often forces us to confront deeply embedded thoughts and feelings and ideas. And once we've done that, I believe that change is not only possible, it's inevitable. Koto usually comes into play when we venture outside of our sphere of comfort. Otherwise, we probably don't notice it much. I mean, you've probably heard yourself say, thank God I brought my mittens because it's awfully cold out there. But you probably never heard yourself say, thank God I packed my moral superiority because these people. So let's talk a little bit about koto. We carry it around with us all day, every day. We keep it in our hearts, in our minds, in our souls. And though it's heavy, the weight is dispersed in such a way that we usually don't pay it much mind until we unpack it. Case in point, when I first came to Japan, I only intended to stay here for 1 year. But 3 years later, I was still here, and I decided that I was going to stay here. At that time, I was working at this big franchise English school in Tokyo. And at this school, they had a special room where students and instructors could go and talk about any topic under the sun. This one day, I was there with these 3 Japanese students. And these 3 students, they love to talk about the differences between Americans and Japanese. This was their favorite topic. Personally, I hated this topic. Mostly because the students will always express these ideas and opinions that rarely reflected the America that I grew up in. And they would assert these opinions with authority to me, the only American in the room. And this day was no different at first. The students had a lot to say about America, and some of it was quite critical. Now, usually, when students became critical about my country, I would hear them out, nod and smile. Okyakusama ne. Okyakusama kami-sama. So I'd nod and smile. But this was all before I came to this decision that Japan was my home. And this decision was key because up until that point, I had no real skin in the game. All right, I was having a ball. Japan was this great big amusement park. Believe me, I was very, very much amused. But this decision changed all of that. All right, I began to see myself differently. I no longer saw myself as a patron at this amusement park. Now I began to see myself and my country as attractions at this Japanese amusement park. And as you might imagine, I was no longer amused. So I don't know if those students knew at that point, but I definitely knew that the next critical remark that came out of their mouths about my country, tis of thee, would be met, let's just say my nodding and smiling days were over. Right now, this feeling, this koto, it wasn't nationalism or patriotism. I mean, if I had suddenly become a nationalist or a patriot, those students would have had to call an ambulance to carry me out of there on a stretcher. All right. But the reason I left America was not because I hate America. It was mostly because I wanted to gain a new perspective in a new environment, not out of hate. Truth be told, the strongest feeling I had for America at that point that I was conscious of was disappointment. But this koto, this feeling, it wasn't nationalism, it wasn't patriotism, and it wasn't disappointment. It was more akin to the feeling you might have about your child. Now, let's say your child is, you know for a fact, your child is the worst bully in the school, right? He beats the crap out of the boys on a regular, and he grabs the girls by their private parts, and he throws history books at the teachers, and He steals anything that isn't nailed down. He's a bad seed, a bad seed. But that's your child, all right? That's your problem child, your flesh and blood. And you still hold on to this belief, this unfounded faith that someday, some way, your child will grow up to be a fine and decent human being, that underneath all that anger and hostility and racism and bloodshed and violence, underneath all that ugliness, there's greatness. And not that make America great again greatness, but real genuine greatness just waiting to be unleashed. So naturally, if someone criticizes your child or mistreats your child, you're going to take issue with that. And if someone, God forbid, puts their hands on your child, you're ready to go to the mattresses, right? So I think it's safe to say that this koto that I unpacked, it wasn't love. I wouldn't call it love, but it was definitely something powerful and paternal and protective I felt for America. So now you got this koto. It's laid out before you in all its glory. What are you going to do with it, right? If you're a tourist, you could just ignore it. You're going home next week. You could just ignore it. But you're not a tourist, right? You are a human being striving to build and maintain meaningful relationships, all right? You're trying to hone a mindset that will behoove you, that will benefit you, that will position you for success here in your new environment. You've immersed yourself in a new culture, in a new language, and this is all hard work. It's all complicated stuff, all right? Fun and games are over. The amusement park is closed. You're playing for keeps now. All right? In my case, I just knew. There was no way I could just traipse through my new life here in Japan with this volatile koto on the loose, with this American chip on my shoulder. Because I had already been living here 3 years prior to coming to this decision to stay here. And in that time, I had already got a sense of what life is like here in Japan. All right? And those 3 students, they were just the tip of the iceberg. I knew that here, more so than in America, here I would be judged first and foremost by my nationality and by my skin color, and that any presumptions and any stereotypes floating around about either would be applied to me without a second thought. So I knew that the key to my success, to thriving and surviving in Japan, was the management of this koto, that I had to make peace with the American in me and make way for the person I was becoming by virtue of wrenching myself free from the overwhelming influence that America had over my thoughts and my feelings and my actions. To cease to be a mere American and to become a global citizen in the truest sense of the term, which has much more to do with what's going on in your heart than what it says on your passport. So, let's say you're a student going to start a new school, or you're moving to a new neighborhood, or you're starting a new job, or like myself, you're making a go of it in a new country. At some point, all of us are going to find ourselves on unfamiliar turf. And unfamiliar turf is fertile territory for koto to make an appearance. Now, I hope I haven't given the impression that koto is always bad news. It isn't. Sometimes you'll find that your koto has been working on your behalf all along. And if that's the case, I say let it be. But if you find that it has been quietly undermining your efforts to achieve your goals all along, then isn't it wonderful that we all have this capacity to liberate ourselves of this stuff? All right? Now, there's no one-size-fits-all way to do this. All right? Some people do it creatively. They draw, paint, they write, make music, DJ. Some people do it spiritually, meditate, pray, yoga. Some people find a community or a cause that inspires them. It's a very personal journey. My journey, which has taken me from teacher to blogger to author to columnist to activist here in Japan, to a person of some notoriety, my journey began with this thought. What kind of impact would it have on the negative perception of blackness here in Japan if I used my ingenuity, my energy, my gifts to bring black excellence to national attention? That was the thought I had. And that thought gave me a destination. And once I had that destination, it seemed that the load I've been lugging around all my life had lost some of its heft. And my mind became open to the abundance of opportunities that the mere American me might have misconstrued as misfortune or missed altogether. Likely, your circumstance will be very different than mine. You're probably not an African American living abroad, shocked to discover he has complicated feelings about both sides of that hyphenation. And you're probably not a black American raised in a hyper-racialized environment, trying to temper his sensitivity and temper his sensibilities to an entirely new racial dynamic. And you're probably not a person who has come to the alarming realization that you too are capable of prejudging human beings based on nationality and skin color, all of which are koto I've had to unpack over the past 15 years. However, I'm sure your koto is equally complex. So whatever your destination may be, I implore you to make sure that your luggage is suitable to your journey. And if it isn't, unpack that koto and lighten your load. Thank you.